time to get that started. Hey, coming at you live once again from Santa Cruz County, bringing only the hottest Google Slides to you on Twitch and on YouTube. This one's going to be another in a series of podcasts I've been doing on Artemidorus of Daldis, the Dream Weaver. And today I'm going to address another viewer question. I've gotten this question from a few people. Here's the question. Well, you want me to tell you about my dreams so you can interpret them. How do I know when I'm dreaming? How do I know when I'm awake? Well, this is a tough question. I understand why you brought it to me. And the answer is, well, you really can't tell. You can't tell when you're asleep. You can't tell when you're awake. Some experts claim that they can tell when you're dreaming and when you're not, but I think that those claims have not been scientifically validated. The truth is you just don't know if you're dreaming right now. And you know, this reminded me of one episode of the Batman cartoon series from way back when, back when there were still shows on television, in which Batman is zapped into a kind of an alternate reality by Scarecrow, the scary psychologist villain, who has a PhD, which makes him automatically a villain in the world of big beefy superheroes like Batman. And he uses some kind of powerful drug to send Batman into an alternate reality, a kind of a permanent coma, in which everything's pretty much fine for Batman, and it's kind of, I think, supposed to incept the idea that he doesn't really need to be Batman, he doesn't need to do this thing, but the way that Bruce Wayne figures out that he's in a dream, he's in a chemically induced dream state, is that he can't read. When he looks at books, all he sees is nonsense. And for the longest time, I thought, hey, that's the way to tell when you're dreaming and when you're not. And then I got into graduate school and I started dreaming about reading stuff, and I realized that that's just nonsense. You know, you can't tell that way whether you're asleep or whether you're awake. You can read in a dream just as well as you can in waking life. And you know, Artemidorus tells us you can even learn to read in a dream. You can become literate in a dream. You can learn to read when you did not know how to read before. You can go to dream school. And if you dream that, if you have the dream that you're learning how to read, that means you're going to get a big prize. But the journey will be full of fear and trouble, because that's what learning to read is like in the ancient world. You spend a lot of time sitting in a small cramped room, laboriously pronouncing syllables of Greek or Latin or whatever you're learning, probably getting whacked on the hands and other body parts by a vicious and abusive teacher. It really sucks to learn how to read. It's torture, everyone says, who writes about this. And that's one factor among many in producing an ancient world where most people can't read. Probably not too many people can read. Somewhere between 5 and 10% um, of ancient people are what we would call fully literate. Literacy is a rare attainment that opens a lot of doors for you. So that's why, according to Artemidorus, you get that big prize if you learn to read. If you learn to read, you get that big prize, but there's going to be a lot of toil and trouble along the way. Well, that's if you don't know how to read in real life and you dream about learning to read. Remember, for these dreams, the dream interpretations, the dreamer's identity, the dreamer's status matters a lot. So, if you're illiterate in real life and you dream about learning to read, that means you're going to get the big prize. That's interesting because it suggests there's actually an illiterate audience for Artemidorus' dream interpretation, that these interpretations are supposed to be used to help people who can't actually read interpret their own dreams. So it's meant to be a kind of instruction manual, not just something you read to interpret your own dreams. Well, what about if you do know how to read already? Then it is extremely not a good thing if you learn to read in a dream, because that's a bunch of trouble and fear and terror for nothing, right? You already know how to read. You don't need to get beaten by a teacher for 5 years to learn to read again. Plus, it's kind of childish and regressive, and for Artemidorus, that means unemployment. Apraxia. You will be unemployed. This is a huge worry in Artemidorus, and I think it to some extent reflects the worries of his prospective audience as well, and maybe a bit close to home nowadays too. If you dream about doing something childish, like learning to read, if you already know how to read, that means that you will be unemployed in the future. I don't know if you've had those dreams where you go back to school. I had them occasionally. It turns out they're a super bad omen. So I guess that's something to worry about. So one question that's important for interpreting these dreams about learning to read is whether you know how to read or not already. The other important question is, what language are you learning to read? Because there are more than one in the Greco-Roman world, in the Roman Empire. So nowadays we kind of default to a national language, the language that's used in instruction in schools. For me, as for most US Americans, that language was English. So there's not this question of choice. What language are you learning to read in? But the Roman Empire was extremely multilingual. And 2 languages were taught widely throughout the empire, both Greek and Latin. These have traditions of teaching as well as literacy, and they're taught kind of everywhere in the empire. You can learn them, no matter where you are. So the choice is between those 2, Greek and Latin. Learning the one you don't know, Artemidorus says, could mean, oh, you're going to marry somebody who belongs to that ethno-linguistic group. But it could also mean something much worse. If you're learning to read Latin, because Artemidorus says learning to read Latin equals enslavement. The reason he says that is that slaves never learn Greek. But they do often have to learn those, what Artemidorus calls barbarica grammata, barbarian letters. It's a kind of a derogatory way of referring to Latin. Apparently, in Artemidorus' world, the slave master is paradigmatically Roman. You have to learn to write and read Latin if you are going to become a slave. So learning to read Latin means you're going to be enslaved. I hope that this doesn't turn anyone off on the Latin course, because of course this is only a rule in dreams. In real life, you can learn Latin without being enslaved. Well, what does it mean if, after all, as sometimes happens, you actually, like Batman, can't read in a dream? You find yourself to be dream illiterate. This does not mean that you'll become Batman. Doesn't mean that. Artemidorus says that it means something else. It means that you will be unemployed. The length of your unemployment depends on the number of letters you screw up when you try to read them. If anyone has this dream, please let me know. It could indicate when the end of the pandemic is coming. Hopefully that's soon. Hopefully we'll eventually be able to leave our homes. In the meantime, keep learning, dreaming, and don't panic. I will catch you here again, same time, same place, next week.